Is diplomacy like Woodstock? Who's that big France in the ODC final? And is Mariah Carey really that awful? I'm David Hood of the Diplomacy Broadcast Network, and we'll answer those questions and more here on Deadline, DBN's monthly news program. Dateline June 2023. For our feature story, the North American Diplomacy Championship, called DIPCON, is one of the hobby's oldest institutions. Born in 1966, as were TV's Star Trek and DBN's Deadline host, DibCon was at first just a gathering designed to encourage postal dip fans to meet each other face to face. Beginning with the 1970 DibCon in Oklahoma City, a more formal tournament was instituted in order to get competitive juices flowing, with everyone since then but one awarding the coveted title of North American Champion. In 1986, the event in Fredericksburg, Virginia, marked the first time DibCon had been won by a Britisher, in that case, Malcolm Smith. The latest DibCon, held just a few weeks ago, saw Michalis Kamarites become the fifth player from the UK to win DibCon. Later in this program, we'll talk to Michalis about his tournament win, his face-to-face experiences in general, and how online and face-to-face players should try each other's modes of play. But first, a look at headlines from around the world of diplomacy. Let's start with a more complete report from that 2023 DIPCON held in conjunction with DixieCon in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Coming in second to Kamarites was Floridian Doc Bender, a past World DIPCON winner, with third place going to longtime face-to-face hobbyist Steve Cooley of Massachusetts. Hey, you want to know the first time Steve came in third at a DixieCon? In 1990, when that DixieCon also served as the host of DipCon and World DipCon. The more things change, the more things stay the same. Full coverage of this year's DipCon is available right here on DBN in case you missed it the first time. Just follow the link below. Also, it was announced shortly after this year's event that the 2024 DipCon shall be held in late January in conjunction with the Cascadia tournament near Vancouver, British Columbia. We'll give you more details here on Deadline as soon as they become available. The Francophone Association of Diplomacy Players, known as the AFJD, has announced the upcoming face-to-face French Championship coming up the weekend of July 14 through 16 in Champs-sur-Léon near the city of Nantes. This 39th annual championship event is to be held inside the main reception room of the La Thomas Winery and will feature 4 games of diplomacy over 3 days using C-Diplo scoring. Each of the games will last about 4 hours. For more information, visit the link below to the Facebook page of Gabriel Lecontre. If you can't go that far to get your diplomacy fix, we have an NADF event scheduled that same weekend in Denver, Colorado. It's the return of the Regatta, a face-to-face event put on by the Armada Diplomacy Club. Regatta was once an integral part of the NADF tournament circuit, hosting DipCon in 2001 and World DipCon in 2003. It's great to have that event back on the schedule. A link to the tournament information is also provided below, and this just in, DBN personality Ed Sullivan will be in attendance, so why don't you join him? Now, here's a question for you. Is diplomacy the Woodstock of board games? One poster on Reddit posed that question because he wondered if all the folk who talk the game down online are just folk who have never actually played the game, but just wanted to signal their being in the in crowd, the one that thinks that diplomacy destroys friendships. Just like all the people who have claimed to be at Woodstock over the years who just physically could not possibly have been there. The responses to his post are in the link below, but they follow much of what we diplomacy players believe when negative comments about the game come up among gamers. Yes, the game can be stressful and aggravating for some players, but for those who give it a chance, the game actually forges more long-term relationships than it harms. Read the whole thread for yourself. It is linked below, but most hobbyists involved in diplomacy evangelism admit that our game is not for everyone, but it is for anyone who wants a lot of human interaction and strategic thinking without a bunch of dice. If you are watching this and have not tried the game, come on in. The water's fine. I mentioned the upcoming tournament in Denver for mid-July. That is just the tip of the iceberg for summer diplomacy this year. Over the weekend of July 26th through 28th, the 2023 edition of the VWDC Summer Classic is expected to take place on the VWDC Discord server. This virtual face-to-face tournament got its start during the pandemic when many regular face-to-face events held virtual versions. But the Summer Classic was and is intended as a virtual-only event to be paired with the Virtual Diplomacy Championship, the VDC, which takes place in December. Stay tuned for more information by joining the VWDC Discord server at the link provided below. The weekend after the Summer Classic will see the return of the venerable face-to-face tournament known as the Boston Massacre, run by Alex Maslow. This year's event, which is the first weekend in August, will take place at Pandemonium Books and Games in Cambridge and will feature one round each on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. A registration form is linked below. And then, of course, in mid-August, you've got World DipCon invading Bangkok, Thailand, for the first such event to be held on the Asian mainland. Opportunities for dip play truly abound. In diplomacy, we have 3 World Championships events now for 3 different modes of play. For face-to-face, there is World DipCon, as I just mentioned, the WDC, which actually started in 1988. For virtual face-to-face, which became a thing during the pandemic in 2020, we have the VDC every December. And for online extended deadline play of diplomacy, we have the ODC, the Online Diplomacy Championship, which is housed either on web diplomacy or play diplomacy, starting every 2 years or so, beginning in back in 2015. The current ODC is on PlayDip, and it's in its final stages, with the top board having been announced in April. The field of 7 includes Red Candle, Expatriate 11, Conch, Tanjian, Poodleflump, MSC 1914, and Yanni. As we broadcast, the game has entered spring 1909, with France at 13 centers, Russia at 11, France at 7, Italy at 2, and England with just Liverpool. Because the game is being played anonymously, we don't yet know who is playing each power, but it's fascinating to see how differently this top board game has been played in comparison to other recent top boards. In other top boards, balance of power play is more predominant, leading to board tops with much less than the number of centers these people already have. So stay tuned right here on Deadline. We'll report on the ODC results as soon as they're available. Now let's take a trip around the world of YouTube channels and other diplomacy content creators to report to you on the latest and greatest new diplomacy products from whom we call our DBN media partners. The Diplomats YouTube channel continues to release videos analyzing each turn of the Olympus Season 1 tournament final game being played on Backstabber. Host Ed Sullivan, along with a gaggle of commentators, carefully pull apart and examine every player's every move, creating a great spectacle for the rest of us. The 2 most recent videos study fall 1903 and winter 1904 of this top board and spring 1904, with the Austria of Bradley Grace currently leading the field at 8 centers, with each of England, France, and Germany in a 5-center chaotic war against each other in the West. A link to the channel is provided below. And then we've got the Diplomacy Briefing Newsletter's latest weekly edition. It features a last section of an award-winning diplomacy article from 2003 about the persuasive illogic of dip negotiations by longtime player Paul Windsor. The briefing also has its usual mixture of news and gossip. You should really subscribe to the newsletter if you don't already at the website linked below. In league news, the next game day for the Tour of Britain Virtual Diplomacy League will take place on Saturday, June 24th at 4 p.m. London time. Tournament director Gary Sturley runs this event every month on the VWDC Discord server. After the first 3 rounds of play, Maryland resident Jason Bennett has surged to the top of the leaderboard. Or as Gary says, this is your chance to participate in diplomacy's answer to the Red Wedding. So join the server using the link below to sign up to play. It does not matter if you have played in previous rounds this season, you can still play now. The other English language virtual league, the VDL, the Virtual Diplomacy League, completed its latest game day on June 17th with full coverage of the games right here on the Diplomacy Broadcast Network. 4 games of the VDL were extensively covered in that episode, as well as 2 games from the Nexus League's press tournament featuring guest commentary by Nexus League veteran Andrew Zick. Catch this YouTube broadcast using the link in the show notes. Now let's report on the latest news from the world of diplomacy fan magazines, which we in the hobby just call zines. I had just reported on the zine called Last Orders in a previous episode of Deadline, but recently, Last Orders publisher Simon Langley Evans announced he's decided to fold his zine, given other time commitments. So he'll be completing his current diplomacy games as a sub-zine to Stephen Agar's relatively new zine, which is called God Save the Zine. By the way, you should subscribe to God Save the Zine anyway, because Stephen has a decades-long track record of outstanding diplomacy zine production. His zine is transmitted by email, so you can sign up for the latest issue at the website link provided below. You can also download past issues of God Save the Zine for your perusal. It's time now for a segment we call My Favorite Things, in which we interview a dip hobbyist about their passion or interest, whether or not related to diplomacy. This month, we welcome to the show Virginia hobbyist Hal Shield to talk about diplomacy, yes, but also talk about his experiences from a career in media production. Hal, welcome to Deadline.
Thank you, David, for having me.
You got it. Tell us a little bit about yourself and about your diplomacy backstory.
So, born on Long Island, went to college, 2 years in upstate New York at a place called Oswego State College, then transferred to American University in Washington, D.C., film major in Washington, D.C., American University. There's a lot of people who are taking international science classes and majors, their goal being to get into the State Department. A couple of nerdy buddies of mine had this game called Diplomacy. And one night we started around 11 o'clock, partially sober. We finished up our first game at 5 or 6 in the morning, and I was hooked. And I continued to play with this group. And 2 of them went on to the State Department. One was Undersecretary of Chemical Warfare, and another was in charge of getting the old Soviet missiles out of, I think it was one of the stands.
Kazakhstan, probably.
And so it was terrifying to me knowing that those diplomacy buddies were close to the button.
But do you think they were sober by then, though? That's the real.
Oh, they were definitely sober.
Okay, well then I think we're going to be okay. So,
yeah.
So Hal, I first got to know you during the birth of the virtual hobby as a result of the pandemic. Tell us a little bit about your experiences in that regard. The beginning of the virtual hobby.
Well, yes. My diplomacy background was again when I went to college, graduated college, work happens, dropped the hobby, finding 7 people, and the time was impossible. Kids come along, kids leave the house, thankfully. I'm an empty nester, and COVID hits, and I'm like, now what the hell do I do with myself? And I was like, I wonder what diplomacy is doing these days. I had done a couple of mail games, as postal mail games, and I stumbled across a couple of websites that did a poor job of diplomacy, and I don't recall how, but I found Zach and found the VDL and fell in love with it instantly, and was playing as much as I could. It was a lot of fun.
How do you think we've done as a virtual hobby since the early days to now in terms of making it a better experience or not?
I thought it was a good experience at the get-go. I thought the interface between Backstabber and Discord was good. I will say Discord isn't my favorite platform. It's a bit geeky. It's a bit cumbersome. And I'm one who prefers to have a camera on. I do that in Zoom, and I do that in anything virtual. I just, again, maybe it's an age bracket thing. It just feels weird to be hearing someone's voice. To me, that's a conference call. I'm sure you remember what those were, David. Many of
Yes.
our viewers may not know what a conference call was, but it was Discord audio only is a conference call.
Yeah, it's Zoom without the camera.
Exactly. And we used to do that back in the 80s and 90s and 2000s when you had to talk to a group of people. So I do wish we had the camera on for Discord, but I also understand that there are some people who, for various reasons, prefer not to have it, and that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, it's to each his or her own, of course.
Correct.
What the DBN was also born during the pandemic era. How do you think DBN has fit into the modern hobby in the sense of the virtual play or anything else?
I think it's great. It's a great addition. I think it's great having the commentary. It helped me learn some intricacies of the game that I'd forgotten or probably never knew. I got to meet some of the commentators and appreciate their skills. It drives my wife crazy thinking that somebody would actually sit and watch it for 6 hours. Sometimes she and my kids wonder if I need some mental help. But that aside, I think it's great. And I think it helps the hobby. And you could tell that by the followers and the number of viewers that we have.
Well, I asked you about DBN because you yourself have provided some technical expertise to the network in a number of ways due to the fact that you frankly know what the hell you're doing and the rest of it. So tell us your occupational background a little bit.
Well, as I said earlier, I was a film major in school, and I'm old, and the timing of my graduation from school was literally when MTV was born, literally when doing video became something that was more easy to do. I won't say it was like today. Obviously, we didn't have cell phones and whatnot. And while I was in college, between my junior and senior year, I had already produced and directed a number of college videos. I started the American University television station. Had background there, and because of that, I was recruited by the CIA to help them make videos. Did that for a couple of years, then went up to New York, and again at that time, MTV was a big thing. Music videos were a big thing, and started producing, directing music videos, television shows, movies. Worked with like Oliver Stone on Wall Street. Again, I'm old. If you haven't seen the movie, check it out. Mariah Carey, various other celebrities, did live broadcasts, did live corporate events, so on and so forth. And I still do it now. I started my own company a few years ago, and I still help. I'm a geeky guy, so I can help people like DBN out with what for them seems rather complex. And for me, I've been doing it for 30, 40 years, so it's not that hard.
Well, it must have changed a lot, though, in the last 30 to 40 years, just from a technological point of view and everything else.
Yes. I will say when I first got to New York, frankly, when I started at the CIA, they had just put in a TV studio. And the purpose of the TV studio was to brief high-level White House officials, get them ready for meetings, brief them on various happenings of the day, kind of like a 60 Minutes was the model of how can you brief somebody using television, because at that time the president didn't really like to read briefing books. He wanted to watch things. So that's how that started, and it wasn't that easy. It was cameras were big, and it would cost you $1 million to build a TV studio. And now, literally on my Apple laptop that I'm on right now for $3,000, I can edit videos and upload them and move them around the world. And it's really quite unbelievable at times what the internet lets you do.
Well, I think people have described it in the past as a democratization of the media content creation business. Yeah, what is your view of that?
I would agree. I think it's true for print. It's true for video, and it's plus and minuses. And Twitter's a great example of that. You know, everyone's for free speech, but then how you define that and where you put up gates is still being figured out. And that's true in video. And the other plus I would say that gatekeepers give you is they give you some wisdom, they give you some perspective. that perhaps other people don't have, and help make you think of all the possibilities of how things you're doing can affect other people. So it's a plus and minus, I would say.
Well, back to DBN for a minute, there is no gatekeeper between us and YouTube, us and our audience.
Correct.
And we're just one small example of that process writ large in media and culture.
Right.
Isn't it awesome that we're able to come straight?
Oh, absolutely. And I say this kiddingly sometimes to some of the younger people I meet. Do they know what radio is? Like I've got two kids, and my daughters are 20, 27 and 30, and my younger one probably has never really listened to radio. You just stream things now. And when you watch TV, it's not like you and I, David, had in the old days where there were 3 or 4 choices and you had to get up and turn the channel. Maybe you're not that old, but I had to get up and turn the channel.
Oh no, I turned plenty of channels.
Yeah. And so now, what's broadcast, what's television, what's streaming, the movie industry is going through that. What's a movie? Do people go to movie theaters and watch it? But I do think, to your point, it's great that niche hobbies can reach out to their audience like they never had before. I bet you if we Googled it, you'd find some model train network that was broadcasting from model train shows, and fill in the blank. Just all the different hobbies you could think of. There's now a pickleball league that's being broadcast across the country. So
yeah, I actually watched some of that not too long ago. It was on a TV screen in a restaurant or something,
right,
and noticed there was pickleball. But not every classic board game has a blank broadcast network though.
For sure. I can't imagine watching. Although I'd be curious to Google it later. I bet you there's not a Monopoly channel nor a Game of Life channel.
Maybe there is, but I'm not even sure there's a Catan broadcast network, if you know what I mean.
Right.
There's certainly a lot of gaming. There's
Right.
millions of people watching gaming every second.
Right.
But I'm talking about from a broadcast point of view, diplomacy does have a little bit of a unique character to it, doesn't it? In terms of a classic game that could still be so subtle, have such subtleties to it that you can have a broadcast network.
Well, that's one of the best parts about diplomacy to me, and one of the reasons I picked it up again is if you really think about what the rules are, it's 2 or 3 double-spaced pages. Understanding how to move a unit or how to support a unit is it's no harder than checkers, frankly. How do you move your units? And I used to play a lot of different games, and once you lose the ability to spend 6 hours reading a rule book nowadays, a lot of the games you just can't play anymore. And I was an early video gamer back when there was a thing called Intellivision and Atari. But now,
I loved Intellivision.
Yes, there were a couple of really great games on there.
Utopia. Say Utopia.
Yeah, Utopia, absolutely. And,
yes.
and you remember there was a bombing game and a submarine game.
There was a sea battle game.
Right.
And
now if you Google Intellivision, you can find the emulator and you can play those games again. And as soon as you turn them on, you're like, oh God, this is so bad. How did I possibly waste, 7 days of my life playing this game to get to the end of it?
That's a phenomenon in diplomacy. I think back to playing postal games where you had one turn per month, and you were writing letters to each other, and sending postcards, and you think, man, how did I ever put up with that? And it's because in relation to what?
Right. I played that once because I couldn't, take the 8 months to finish a game up. It just became too frustrating for me.
I had games that lasted 3 years and stuff.
Right. Yeah. And I the other I'll say passion I have when it comes to gaming is I play a lot of fantasy baseball. And I first came across that in 1996 on CompuServe, just when the internet was still pretty early, and you had to take your phone and you hear that wobbly noise and whatnot. Because that was another game that was easily learned, easily put onto the internet to even back then crudely, but drafts would last 12, 14 hours. I don't know if you've played any fantasy sports or you
Well,
probably
I've played fantasy basketball way back in the day.
okay. So you're at least you have some sense of what it is. And again, I truly mean that the first time I played it, I swear we started drafting at 7, 8, or 8 o'clock at night, and I finished at like 4 o'clock in the morning.
There's a theme for you that you go on into the evening doing really geeky, nerdy things.
Yes, yes,
That's a theme.
yes, indeed. And I'll also say that back in those days, when it came time to draft my fantasy teams, I would actually give my wife several hundreds of dollars to take the kids out of the house and go shopping for the day so I could draft without family members around. And it was a win-win for everybody.
That's an expensive hobby, but this particular segment is called My Favorite Thing. So I'm going to start asking you some favorite things. So favorite artist that you worked with in your professional career?
Donald Fagen, Steely Dan, nicest guy around. And to me, if you have to be a rock star, and I consider Donald Fagen a rock star, few people know what he looks like. You could walk into a restaurant, few people even really know his name, and you could go to dinner and not be badgered. And the flip side of that, I will say, is the worst experience of my life, period, bar none, was spending a week with Mariah Carey.
I don't think that's going to surprise very many people.
The song Dream Lover, if you've ever heard that song, and I did the music video, and to this day, when I hear it, my stomach turns.
Wow, that's quite something. Well, let's pivot back to diplomacy. Favorite country to play?
I've been thinking about this. I think it's France. I like the fact that they get 2 easy builds. I like the fact that either Germany and or England is going to come after you. Occasionally, Italy does. So there's less variables than a Italy or Germany or an Austria in the middle of the board.
All right. So favorite alliance to play in a game of diplomacy?
Well, if you're going to be France, then your favorite alliance is England, because if you get a good partner there, and I play a partner game, I probably do it too much. I've heard several people, including yourself, occasionally make it an aside that I'm too good an alliance player, because there always comes a point where you need to stab, or almost always.
Almost not every single point.
No, not a lie. I tripled on I had to triple solo or triple draw at Dixie, where the alliance worked out that way. And I've done a couple of times where, yes, you can definitely. And what's the good part about being considered too much of an alliance player is when you do occasionally get out of the mold and stab somebody, they're very surprised. So
yeah, I remember there was some virtual game you were playing where you were in a Western Triple as Germany, and you actually topped the board. The EFG stayed together. That wasn't too long ago. Sometime
right. Yes, indeed. But I tend to, and I'll also say that's a trait outside of the game. I tend to partner with. I've got a business partner, and not making analogies here to good or bad, but I do. That's kind of the way I run my life. So
you stick with people through thick and thin.
Correct. Most of the time that works. Sometimes you realize halfway through you made a bad choice.
All right. Favorite way to play the game? That I mean, like virtual or face to face.
I like both. I will say though, when I go to Dixie, which we just had a couple weeks ago, I love the face to face. I'll say the first game I played, and David Molesky was on it, and a couple other people. It was probably the most civil game of diplomacy I've ever played, and it was very enjoyable. It was very enjoyable. But the virtual is good too. There's pluses to both sides of it. I would say.
Yeah, I think all of the above is probably the right answer, but still, it's called My Favorite Things. I'm going to ask for favorites.
Right, so right. But the upside to the virtual is you get to meet people from around the world. I mean, I know that, as my wife frequently points out, there seems to be a tournament every weekend, which is a slight exaggeration, but not by much. And now all the face-to-face is back open, and I'll be like, sure, I'd love to go to Denver or Vancouver or Chicago or Boston. And I realized, well, damn, add it all up, that's a lot of money, and it's a lot of time, so it's not possible. But through the wonders of Discord, you can meet those people and play against, again, people, Robert Shoup, Europeans come in, you get some. So I think that's probably, at the end of the day, that's been the biggest plus to the VDL, is the fact that people from anywhere in the world can play.
Well, speaking of that, meeting new people, favorite person you've met in the hobby? Yes, you have to pick one.
Wow, boy, that's hard. I will say yourself is certainly on the list.
No.
I'm going to get to one. I'll say meeting Zach was great. I drove down Dave Molesky. He and I have gone to a couple of baseball games together. I got to ride down from DC with Johnny Gillum and Tanya. We spent a few hours in the car together. That was great. But I'd probably have to say my favorite person, he doesn't play virtual that much. He goes by the screen name of Tarzan. His first name is Todd out of Pittsburgh. I'd probably have to say that's my favorite person. And probably also he and I are about the same age and in the same, life situation. So we bonded through that too. That's
totally fair. Favorite part of going to diplomacy tournaments?
Well, seeing everybody. And I to be transparent, I went to DixieCon. This is my second one. And so the first one was a little awkward because there's a bunch of people that you've just met through cameras off in VDL. But now that I came back a second time and I knew people, that made it so much better. And having seen people on DBN, all the commentators and having some of them there, it was great.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Finally, favorite part of the game of diplomacy itself. What about diplomacy keeps you coming back?
Similar to chess, it's you're because there's so few rules and there's not the randomness of dice or some other deck of cards that someone pulls a lucky card. However skilled you are at poker, there still has to be some element of luck getting the right cards. My favorite part is just matching wits against people. And I will say frequently I'm witless, but it's fun when you get that moment where you do well and the moves you planned worked out. I will say that's my favorite part. Well, that's what's kept me interested in the game for 40 years. Is that I'm competitive that way. And sometimes you win. In my case, very rarely you win, but I always have a good time.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, because that, of course, is the point, is to have a good time.
Yes.
And I think that is what brings us back, is the fact that we can all find something in diplomacy that allows us to have such a great time, frankly, win or lose a lot of the time.
Right. And I'll also say, hats off to you, David, going to Dixie. And the first time I went and you talked about there are all these other board games, I was like, who cares? I want to play diplomacy. And I quickly realized that's just as much fun. And I had a great time playing game 1775 at Dixie this year with Goff and Tarzan and Ben Kelman. It was a blast. So both I enjoyed both parts of it.
It's another one of those things where the answer should be all of the above, please.
Absolutely. And I'll be back next year. I can guarantee you that already.
All right, Hal, I appreciate that, and I appreciate you being on the show.
Sure. Thank you for inviting me. It's always good talking to you, David. Have a good one.
Same to you. And now for our feature presentation. It had been since 2014 since a resident of the United Kingdom won the North American Diplomacy Championships. In that case, Dan Lester, who also went on to come in second in World DipCon that same year and won the whole bloody thing last year in Vermont. Michalis Kamarites traveled to the 2023 DipCon in Chapel Hill, gunning for a victory, which he actually achieved in dramatic fashion. Joining us this month on Deadline is the champ himself to talk about his DixieCon experience, his overall recent face-to-face experience, and just what makes him tick, both as a diplomacy player and as a frequent analyst right here on DBN. Michalis, welcome to the show.
Hi, pleasure to be here.
Great. Start off with, if you would, please tell us how and why you got into the game of diplomacy.
So when I was a kid, I played a lot of strategy games on computer. I played a lot of Age of Empires, Civilization, Total War. So one day I saw a couple of people playing web diplomacy, and I see a map game and I go, oh, that's quite interesting. I'll go have a look at that. So I went home, looked it up, started playing a few games. I was about 15, 14 at the time, so I wasn't particularly good when I started, but just through playing quite a lot, sort of got better at it after a couple of years. And then, yeah, I've been playing it since 2010, ever since.
Great. Well, you've been known primarily as an online player, up to a few years ago. And then you became sort of a leading name in the virtual diplomacy space. Describe, if you would, how different virtual face-to-face is from playing the extended deadline games like on WebDip that you had learned on.
So I got into virtual after a couple of years break from diplomacy in general. Tanya and Marcus, who I've known for years through WebDip, sort of recruited me up. I think it was for VWDC at the end of 2020. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. And I think for me, like, I struggle now to maintain the motivation for a months long game that you get an extended deadline. Like, life happens and I'll be really infused at the start, but maybe not so much after, after a month or two. Whereas virtual face-to-face, you're setting aside a block of 6 to 8 hours and you're just going to play that game through. And I really, really enjoy that. And yeah, for me, it's definitely the sort of speed that you get from that and the constant momentum you have from playing a virtual game. I find it really, really enjoyable. And I think the biggest difference is when you're playing extended deadline, you'll be there writing very long, flowery essays every phase. You're always trying to talk to people, and to some degree, the more you say, the better, basically. Whereas virtual, with your 15-minute phases, you don't have that luxury. You've got to be concise, but you've still got to build that connection. So there's definitely a difference in the way you approach your communication, and again, that's something I really enjoy.
There are some people that tell me that, that are more extended deadline players, that they enjoy that because they have more time to think through their moves and not make sort of dumb mistakes, and have time to respond to people more than in a sort of an immediate virtual or a face-to-face experience. What would you say to that issue?
Yeah, I think that's a skill that you learn. Reading a board quickly is something that's really important in virtual and in normal face-to-face as well, of course. And again, online, if you're playing blitz games, that's something else where it's really important. But if you're only playing the sort of 2-day phases, you can look as a turn goes through, have some thoughts, come back a couple hours later and go, actually, maybe I want to do this instead. And again, if you've also got the luxury that you can change your plans a lot more easily, whereas in virtual face-to-face, it's a lot harder midway through a phase to suddenly go back to your ally and go, actually, let's do something completely different. Not necessarily impossible. Your conversations may have gone that way and, hey, look, there's actually an opportunity. Let's go do this. But yeah, I do agree. You have to conclude what you want to do more rapidly than you do in an extended deadline. But again, I think that's part of the game, and I really enjoy that.
So for you, that's a feature. That's a feature of that, not a bug, so to speak.
Yeah, and like one of the reasons that people might say it is that you can't do clever plans as easily. It's a lot harder to arrange some really 4D chess move out of the box. But I don't necessarily agree. I've done quite a few unusual moves in virtual, and if you've got it in your head quite quickly and go, actually, this could work out, you can still lay the ground and seed that out there and see it work. So I think, yeah, you don't necessarily have as much time to plan, but you still have time. Like, it's not a constant panic and mad dash, or it shouldn't be. Yeah.
Well, you have as much time as anybody else has, I guess.
Exactly.
There's another way to look at it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you mentioned blitz or blitz press. Some people use different terminology. Tell us what that is and how that experience is different.
So blitz is 5-minute games, usually on WebDip. I don't know if they play elsewhere yet, but it's 5-minute. But it's full press. It's not gunboat like speedboat games are. So when I first played on WebDip back in 2010, these were really common, like especially on Friday or Saturday nights, but just throughout the week, there'd generally be 1 or 2 games every single night. And I played in a lot of these games. And obviously 5-minute phases, especially with the interface on WebDip at the time, you didn't even get the full 5 minutes. You'd have to refresh a few times, and you'd actually get about 4.5 minutes every phase. So you're always under a big time pressure. You can't speak to everybody in any sort of detail. You might copy and paste a, hey, good luck, hope we get to work together at the start. But you're focusing on one or two people who you're going to do your negotiations with, and you've maybe got 30 seconds at the start of a turn to absorb what's happened. And you have to look at that and very quickly go, all right, X, Y, Z has happened. This stops me doing this, but now I can do this. Or, hey, our plan worked. Let's follow it up doing this. And then straight into it. And that is constant. And it definitely helped me when I went from extended deadline to face, because I didn't feel the time pressure element so much as, yeah, I've done this. 15-minute phases are luxurious when you're used to playing 5-minute phases. And okay, they sort of went out of fashion, and then they've been brought back in the past couple of years. I know Bob's a Builder runs a lot of them on Discord, and I'm really happy to see that they're played again, because I think that they teach people a pretty key skill in diplomacy in that terms of reading the board quickly and being able to react. And that's something that you don't necessarily have if you only play the 1 day, 2 day phase games online. But yeah, for me, it's all about like being really, really concise and really fast in terms of, all right, this is the decision. I'll send this message. The ally gets back to you. Okay, right, we need to change plan. He doesn't like this. The back and forth is really, really fast. And yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Well, just like anything else in diplomacy, some things are going to be more fun to people than other things, which are more fun to different people. And isn't that great that we have such a wide smorgasbord of activities?
Yeah, exactly. And like some people really enjoy gunboat, and some people enjoy the faster gunboats like speedboat and the slower gunboat as well. So there's so many different ways you can play this game. And Blitz, I think, is some of it that maybe everyone should give it a chance. But if it's not for them, fair enough. It's definitely quite unique compared to most other online diplomacy experiences.
Yeah, that certainly sounds right. Well, as we sit here today, you are fresh off of your resounding victory at the North American DipCon just a few weeks ago. And I know you've already written about this in the Diplomacy Briefing newsletter, but come on, man, tell us how you did it.
So I came to Dixie. I did plan to have maybe I didn't come in and plan to win it. Like, that's a bit hubristic, but I definitely came in and was like, I can do well in this tournament. And obviously I went to Whipping the month before, and that was very much a whirlwind thing. And I went there, it wasn't like I wasn't planning to win, but I went there, it was just, all right, this is awesome. I'm going to go there and enjoy the experience. And I still had that with Dixie, but it was also like, I can do well in this. I'm going to give this a real good shot. And in the past, I've often done well early on, maybe too early on. Like, I played Virtual Dixie a couple of years ago, and I got a 2-way draw in the first round and painted a huge target on my back. Summer Classic top board, I did that. I took a very early lead, painted a huge target on my back. So I came into this one wanting my first round to sort of fly under the radar a bit. I wanted a good score, but not something that sticks me well out in front and gives everyone a reason to target me afterwards. And I played Russia in my first game, and Ben Durfee was Germany, although he took over in 1902. Jaromir Sulja was England, and Austria was Brian Ecton. And early on, there was sort of a Western triple, but I got Jaromir on my side from the start. And so in spring 1902, Germany moved to Silesia, Prussia, Baltic Sea, and Sweden. Not generally great when you're Russia, but England went in hard on Germany at the same time instead of doing the Western triple. So my bacon was saved on that front. And still not a great position to be. I think a couple of years later, myself and Germany were both down to 4 centres each. Brian Ecton, who dominated the East, just picking people off one by one, stabbed me, stabbed Turkey, stabbed Italy. Jaromir was doing pretty well in England, and France was still heavily committed to fighting Italy. But myself and Germany got together, and I'm like, we're both going to get awful results and die if we don't disengage now. And it wasn't very easy. Like, I gave up a centre so that I could convoy him from Prussia back to Kiel. And then for the next 4 years, Berlin stayed Russian with no unit in it, despite German units being all around it, which is not something you see very often. But just from that moment, we both sort of in sync went, yeah, this fight's not going to go well for us. Let's work together. And we did. And yeah, from then on, we slowly pushed back Brian and the other Eastern powers, and Jaromir held off for a while and then came into the Met with us. And eventually we got a three-way draw out of it. I think Jaromir got 13, I got 11, and Ben got 10. And yeah, from the position we were in like 1904, 1905, with 4 centres each and both looking like we were very much on the out, it was a really fun comeback. And it did the job for me. As I came in, I wanted a three-way draw, and I got a three-way draw, and it wasn't such a high one that anyone would be overly concerned by my score, but it's a banker point. That's sort of how I saw that round. It's a banker round to get a decent score, and it worked out. We played until 2:30 in the morning to do it, but it worked out. So
these are unlimited games, so the viewers should be pointed out, except for the Sunday game. These first 2 rounds are unlimited time duration. And I guess a lesson from your game is don't give up. Come up with a new plan. Don't assume that just because you got smacked around the beginning that you can't turn it around.
Yeah, and I believe we were the latest game playing that night, and obviously there was a bit of fatigue, but it was still, the adrenaline was going, and yeah, it was really, really nice to get a good score out of it at the end. And as you've just alluded to, the Sunday round is a timed round. So that was also part of my plan, because that means that the Sunday round is much harder to get a really good Dixie score in. So my plan coming into the weekend was good score in the first round, great score in the second round.
It should be pointed out. It should be pointed out that the third round this year, none of the games were called for time. They all finished before time was called. In fact, they were finished long before we were going to call the time, which is another reason why we do it with an unestablished time, deadline, so that people don't play just to the fact that the game might be ending. In this case, none of them played to the time of the ending.
Yeah, I didn't actually realize that. I knew obviously my game ended before time was up, but I didn't know whether we'd ended 10 minutes before you were going to call it. And by the time we'd stopped discussing and gone downstairs to everyone else, you called any of them. So that's interesting.
I think that all the games were over and there was still 45 minutes or more left on our internal time clock.
Wow.
Yep. But anyway, tell us about round 2.
So yeah, round 2, I came in, and anyone who remembers me playing on WebDip as Hellenic Riot, they'll know that I had a penchant for 2-way draws. And in Dixie, that's a really good result. Obviously, a solo is also a really good result, and if you can go into a game and get a solo, fantastic. But I did come in, especially with the draws not including all survivors element, I came in aiming for a 2-way draw in this round. And I rolled England, and Karthik, who I've played with a lot before, was in Germany. Hudson Defoe, who I'd never played with before, was in France. And in the East, Claude Worrell was Russia, which was particularly interesting to me because in Virtual Dixie, when I got that 2-way draw a couple of years ago, it was with Claude Worrell. So I came in immediately and thought, oh, that could be great. I've never done an England-Russia 2-way draw before, but that's an option. And Doc Binder was Turkey. And I believe the other 2 players were Ben Durfee again from my game the night before in Italy, and Stephen Hogue in Austria. And I remember Doc from Oxford when I went to WDC in my only face-to-face event before this year. That was back in 2017, I think. And Doc was really nice and friendly. And again, I remembered him from that. And so that also helped. But I came in and was like, all right, if I want a 2-way draw and I'm England-France is very doable for a 2-way draw. I've done that on multiple occasions. England-Germany it's also quite doable. It's not quite as easy, but with the draw not including all survivors, you can take some of the risk out of it. So again, that's an option. And obviously, pre-existing relationship with Claude was also there. But then Spring 1901 goes through. Hudson's moved to Burgundy. Fair enough, it's France. Doesn't happen that way. It's not that unusual for that to happen. Ben in Italy has moved both armies north, gone to Tyrolia and to Venice. Not a great start for Karthik. And then there's the Russian moves. And the Russian moves go from Warsaw to Silesia and from Moscow to Warsaw. And the fleet goes to Romania. And all of a sudden, Karthik's in pretty rough position. But Doc in Turkey has broken his DMZs with Claude and gone to Black Sea and to Armenia. So he has a guarantee on Sevastopol in 1901. So now I'm sort of like, okay, if you're going to get a two-way draw, the way to get a two-way draw is for your side of the board to clean up before the other side of the board. Otherwise, you're just never going to get that momentum back. If they get to the stalemate line first, you just can't do it. So Doc's off to a brilliant start. How do I deal with that? Well, I need to slow him down. All right, that means I need to get Claude some builds. Karfik's been attacked by Claude. Karfik's surrounded by our enemy armies. Karfik's dead. All right, by Karfik. And so, boom, bounce Holland. That's him essentially done. Like, I think he was dead by the end of 1903. Hudson, who I'd not worked with before, was really good to work with. Like we had a lot of fun. We were able to start planning and get on the same page very quickly. And so while we were taking down Karfik, and I helped Claude get into Sweden, so he got that critical third army down because he got no builds out of 1901. That was then a way that slowed Doc down a bit, and Doc made some wrong guesses trying to convoy armies and push his advantage into Russia further, and that again also slowed him down a bit. So we sort of got to the end of 1903 and Karfik was dead and the East had not resolved. So my initial fear that Doc was just going to win the East before I could do anything, that's off the board. So the two-way is sort of back on, but the two-way is probably now at England-Turkey. Maybe in England-France if we get the complete advantage against the East, but probably in England-Turkey. So I'm already talking about this occasionally with Doc, and this would be a really good result. I know Doc had been eliminated in his first round game as well, which also helped because it's like, oh, okay, it's a two-way draw, but I'll have a much bigger score than him overall. Cool. And then, yeah, the next few years, Doc was working with Ben in an IT in the East, and they pretty much as soon as Karfik died, Stephen Hope got collapsed in on by the two of them, and he joined Karfik out of the game. Hudson had attacked Italy in the meantime, though, so Ben in Italy was definitely the weakest of the four of us. And Stephen, I believe, as his dying effort on the game, cut Ionian Sea and helped France take Tunis as punishment to Italy. So that was pretty helpful for us. And at that point, Italy, realizing that they're probably not making the draw, starts trying to help Doc form a line, but also gives up excess centres. So Doc got free walk-ins to Budapest, Vienna, and Greece, and he had a big core of armies because he'd done an IT. And so for me, I was looking at this like, if I'm going to get a two-way draw with Doc, I've got to be able to hold my line against Doc by myself. And so once Karfik was dead, my next few years, I turned on Claude and I just convoyed army after army after army after army. And I got into Ukraine and I had Warsaw, Moscow, Ukraine, I think Livonia. At the stage of the game, by about 1906, I had 11 units and 7 of them were armies and 6 of those were in German or Russian docks.
You know, typical England, typical English position.
Yeah, it was the most army-heavy England I've played in quite a long time. But it got to that stage where I had that really crucial Warsaw and Moscow support hold Ukraine line. And that is such a solid line. It's what I'd given Claude to build in the first place to form, to slow Doc down. And now I'd replaced him and got onto that line. And now I was able to start looking at the board and going, all right, now that I can hold this and don't have to worry about Doc just steamrolling through, can I stab Hudson? And Hudson, to his credit, he did a really good job stiffing out that, okay, England's actually doesn't necessarily need me anymore. So he moved to cover. I went for a 3-dot stab. It was only a 1-dot stab. But
people think Hudson's just more of a devil-may-care player, but he's actually pretty strategic. He just doesn't come across that way because he's sort of a laugh-a-minute kind of guy. Yeah,
he's really friendly guy, but yeah, perhaps I did underestimate him because of that, because I thought it was going to be a 3-dot stab or maybe a 2-dot stab. Like, I think I went for Belgium, Berlin, and Munich was marginal, but yeah, it was only a 1-dot stab. But crucially, I'd also got a fleet next to Mid-Atlantic, and he didn't have a fleet next to Mid-Atlantic because he was in his med battle. And so even though he'd blocked my initial stab, it didn't really matter. His position was pretty bad regardless. I had a walk into Portugal the next year, and so it slowed me down, but it was still enough for me to win the war regardless. And there was a natural 17-17 on if Doc and I both took a lot of risks on where we prioritized our units. Because he could have got to Marseille in Spain before me because he had the Italian Janissary there in the Italian docks, and he had all his fleets there. And Doc turned back to fight me. Doc comes in behind, 17-17. But you don't need that in Dixie with the draw not including survivors.
Right.
So my initial thought was we'll just put Italy as like a buffer zone around there, and we'll both be on like 16 centres, 15 centres, something like that. But the next year, Hudson came to me, and again, he'd realised that although he'd blocked my initial, or some of my initial attack, it didn't matter, he was going to lose. And he was still on 8 dots at the time. I was like, well, that's actually, even though you're not in a draw, that's not a terrible score. So he came to me and said, I'll vote the two-way draw through now. And I looked at the board and I'm like, all right, I'm on 12 centres, Doc's on 11. If I continue this for a couple more years and Italy comes forward and Doc walks into the Italian dots behind, Doc probably actually has more score out of this game than I do. So why not accept the draw now? That means that Doc, given that he's not got a score before, he'd have to get more than my 11 centres from my first game, plus the one advantage I've got hit. So he's looking for 12 plus centres in a three-way draw from the Sunday round. Doable, but not easy.
Right.
Sure. And anyway, if I continue that for 1 or 2 more years, killing Hudson off, I think Doc would have had more dots than I would. And therefore, it's much easier for him to overhaul me. So I said, okay, yeah, I'll take the draw. And yeah, that was that. I took a two-way draw at, I think, 1907, 1908. And yeah, it was a really, really good score. And at the time, I didn't realize it would be such a good score. I thought other people would be going for this sort of thing. And I went around and started looking at the other boards, and there was a game with Steve Cooley in Austria and Peter Jürgen in Italy. Both of them, like I went over there and thought Steve Cooley had a guaranteed solo, and then I came back, Steve had been pushed back, and now Peter Jürgen had a good shot at a solo, and I was like, oh, okay, this is probably still a good score, but they're probably going to have a better one. But then it turned out that Jason Bennett played really well in England and held them back to a three-way draw, and that was huge for me.
It really was. But that was also a fun game to watch as from the commentary point of view, just the back and forth of that game. Both of those games actually were very entertaining. So you go into round 3 leading the tournament, although we don't focus on that as much at Dixie Conks. We don't really talk about results officially, but you knew you were leading the tournament. So what happened next?
So obviously I go back to my point that round 3 is a hard round to get a really good score. And I knew I had 2 good scores. And I rolled Turkey. And my initial thought was, I'm Turkey, I'm playing in a timed round. And to improve my overall score, would have to get more than 11 centres in a three-way draw. It's probably not going to happen. Be nice if it did, but it's probably not going to happen. So if I'm not improving my score out of this, that means that my goal in this game actually has to be to make sure nobody else gets a great score. I wasn't playing with Doc or anyone else who was really high in the standings, but it's still a case of I can't allow a huge two-way draw or anything to come out of this game. So I'll slow the game down, and if I can grow in the process, brilliant. And at the start, there was a big Western triple in the West between Dave Miletsky's England and Cameron Vigby's Germany, and I believe it was Todd Craig who was in France.
Yeah. And
in the East, it was me in Turkey, Jason Bennett in Russia, and Tarzan was Austria, and Emmett Wainwright was playing Italy. And so the East had a fairly normal start, but I put Italy into Greece in 01, did the sort of IT moves, but I decided to work with Jason in Russia instead. We moved accordingly. The Western triple got the jump on Jason, but Jason, because I'd worked with him, was able to hold them back. So now I'm looking at this like as a dangerous Western triple, where someone, particularly France and Germany, were quite extended at the start. That's how someone in the West could end up with a huge score. So instead of doing the usual, perhaps, Turkish play of, hey, there's a Western triple, this is brilliant for me, I just sat there and propped all 3 of them up. And so the Western triple, particularly France, got absolutely nothing out of it. The Western triple did eventually take Sweden and St. Petersburg in the north, but it just then became an EG because France had got nowhere because I'd helped Italy and Austria, but the other 2 hadn't. So they came in, they stabbed France, as generally what happens in a Western triple when one power's not gone anywhere. And again, now I'm looking at like, all right, England and particularly Germany were very big. Got to slow it down. Got to make sure that Germany doesn't get a huge score out of this game. So I'm still not going to attack Russia. We sort of cleaned up Austria. I got into what was actually a pretty decent position. But I think eventually people tired of my slow everyone else down approach. And so they started grinding me out. And sure enough, they got a 4-way draw and I voted myself out of it. But it was, for me, job done. Like, no one's getting a great score out of this game that can threaten my lead. I wasn't going to get more than 11 centres the way the game had gone. Oh, I'm fine with this result. And Doc had come up to my game, I think about a year before it ended, and told me his game was over. He got a 3-way draw, but he got less than 12. So I didn't know about any other scores, but I knew Doc, unless he was pulling some crazy bluff for no particular reason, probably hadn't overtaken me. And
I guess we should point out that at DixieCon, particularly when it's this big, the people are not playing in the same physical location. There's some people that are playing up in lounges that are not in the main gaming area. So not everybody can easily keep up with what everyone else is doing necessarily.
Yeah, so we were in one of those upper floors where it was just us. And yeah, Doc, I believe, was also on one of them. And he'd come up and told us. And yeah, so I knew I was in with a good shout, but I didn't know how any of the games downstairs had gone. So I still wasn't 100% certain. And as you say, no game went to time. So these games had all ended by the time I got downstairs. And so I was like, again, someone could have got a great score. And as it turned out, no one did. I think Karthik came quite close to a solo, but actually, because Karthik had been eliminated in his first 2 games, that wouldn't have won him the tournament anyway. But yeah, in the end, that it turned out I'd done enough, and I'd made the correct gamble that Doc wouldn't be able to get 12 or more centres in the time round.
And congratulations to Michalis Comarides.
Thank you.
All right, so tell us about, was there any particular player that stands out in your mind as impressive that you played with over the weekend? And then just tell us in general who you met and how fun that was.
So I think the most impressive play that I saw over the weekend in my games was actually Jaromir Sawyer in England in the first game, because I've played, I don't know if I've played with him before, but I've seen him around in virtual. I've definitely commentated on his games on DBN. So I know he's used to the sort of normal virtual games with open tribute scoring or one of the other centre-based scoring systems. And as England in that game, when he was allied with me in Germany, when we worked out our differences and they took down France, he was on about 10 centres. He got most of the French dots, some of the northern dots, Iberia, and he could have just charged straight into the med. And in a centre-based scoring system, that is absolutely what you do, because you just go there and you grab as many dots as you can. And you probably would have got 15, 16 centres. But in Dixie scoring, if he'd done that, there's definitely not a 3-way draw, because at least one of Italy or Turkey is necessary to hold him back in the bed to stop the solo. It could well have ended up being a 5-way draw if both of them were there, and it becomes impossible to grind people out. And instead, he recognised this, and he just sat around it. He did all holds for about 2 years, waiting for me in Germany to push Brian back until we were in a sort of more equalised position. He maintained his upper hand. He was the one who ended up with the most dots, but he waited. And I think that's not something that really comes naturally to people. Like, it's not necessarily the logical thing to do in a lot of games. It's, I can take dots, I'll go and take dots. Why am I just entering all holds? A lot of players don't like entering all holds, but he did a really, really good job in recognizing that actually the best way in Dixie scoring to get the best score out of this game is I have to slow down. And he did that, and yeah, we got a 3-way draw out of it. And it was, I was really, really impressed by that, because as you say, well, as I say, it's a lot easier to just charge in and grab everything you can because you've got a great position.
Well, people that know what they're doing will adapt their play style to the particular either the meta of the tournament they're playing in or the scoring system or both.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, yeah, I don't know how much experience with DSS he's had before. I know he's played virtual, but he might have played extended deadline where it's more common. But it definitely impressed me.
He played DixieCon last year. That might have also been an educational experience.
All right, fair enough.
Well, what other people did you meet that you just really had a good time meeting over the weekend?
So there were obviously, I've been on DBN a few times. There were people I've commentated with on DBN. Yourself, for instance. Great to meet you in person. Also, Andrew Goff and Adam Siegel, who I'd both commentated with and I don't believe had met before. They may have been at Oxford and I just don't remember them, or they don't remember me, but that was quite a long time ago in either case. And then there was a lot of people I've known from virtual for, 2 or 3 years now, and who I got to meet for the first time. There were people like Johnny Gillam, Ben Kelman, Jason Bennett, Andrew Zick, who I don't know, I've played a virtual game with him, but as Pixie, I know him from Nexus and from other Discord servers. Steve Hogue, Dave Maletsky, and Nicholas, Bob's a Builder. And all of them were people who I've sort of got to know in the past couple of years online, played a lot of games with in some of the cases, but I'd never met, and I'd never really had the opportunity to meet. They weren't at Whipping when I went before, and it was really cool to meet so many of these people who I've played with and talked with a lot. Meeting them in the flesh for the first time was really great. And there was also people like Tanya, who I've known for years and I've met a couple of times before, but we hadn't seen each other for 6 years. Again, that's quite a long time. And yeah, that was the first time I've seen her since I was in Canada for an F1 race back in 2017, shortly after Oxford.
Yeah, it is one of the best things about conventions is meeting people, either people you've already known online or whatever, or totally new people. You know, Hudson Defoe, you would have had a chance to meet him except for this occasion.
Yeah, and Claude as well. Like I remembered that game from Virtual Dictator where we had our 2-way draw, and it was really cool to talk to him. I think we actually had an hour and a half conversation during the barbecue where we were sat there talking to each other after our game ended.
Well, he's a great conversationalist anyway. Claude is.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun, and yeah, there were so many people there who I'd never met before, never had the opportunity to meet before, and that's a great reason to come to conventions. Like, you may know these people by name, or you may have played games with them before, but the socializing aspect was really, really good. And I mean, Dixie, with the board games that are always going on aside from Diplomacy, or the other board games, also helps like just constantly keep that conversation flowing. There's never a dull moment at a convention, especially Dixie.
Yeah. Well, talk about if online players want to transition to playing in a face-to-face, what advice can you give them based on your recent experiences?
All right. So I sort of touched on this before playing Blitz, that time management isn't so much of an issue for me because I'm used to 5-minute games, and so 15 minutes is quite luxurious. But if players have only played the sort of 1 day, 2 day deadline, that's definitely, I've heard, one of the hardest transitions online to face is, oh, I've got to rush, I've got to speak to everyone, I've got to get this done. And so my advice for that would be, for anyone who's concerned that they might struggle with that, is give virtual a go first, because you can go to virtual, you can get yourself used to those 15-minute phases and then go to an event, and it's less of a problem. You've made a sort of smoother transition. For me, as that's not been such a problem because I've played Blitz, manual adjudication is definitely a little bit of a culture shock.
Yes,
you're just not used to that playing online, and that you're then using half of your brain to read out moves, or to move the pieces on the board, or to work out whether these two players have bounced each other or whatever. So half of your brain is going, all right, this has happened, and what affects that on the board? And then the other half of your brain is at the same time analyzing that and going, all right, that's really good for me, that's really not. This person's not told me the whole truth. They've not done what I expected. So you're doing sort of two separate but correlated thought processes at the same time. And that's definitely not something you ever get online, really, but that takes a little bit of getting used to. But again, you get used to it, I think, fairly quickly. I think definitely, as I say, the time management, if you're worried about that, give virtual a go. And some people, as you say, the untimed round, some people might hear that and go, oh God, that's going to be really fatiguing. And to a degree, yes, but I actually think that fatigue is a lot less of an issue in person than it is in virtual, because I've played long games in both, and like I said, that game went to half 2, but the adrenaline just keeps you going.
It does. Yeah.
And that does keep you going online as well. But I think the big difference is you don't get screen fatigue. And online, you're staring at a screen for 7, 8, 9 hours. That has a physical effect on you, and that is something that you do have to push through, overcome, and to take your frequent breaks, rest your eyes, all of that sort of stuff. But that's not at all a factor in-person face-to-face. And that actually, after you're playing for 7-8 hours, there is a noticeable physical difference, I think, in that, sure, games are long and you might want to be going to sleep, but you are not anywhere near as, your eyes don't hurt, basically. And that, I think, is definitely something that's in favor of face-to-face. And so you don't be put off by the threat of long games.
Well, and there are face-to-face events that have shorter games. But let's get to your role as DBN analyst for a minute. Tell us how that how you see your role as a DBN analyst. What are the your favorite things about it? What are the challenges about it?
So I really enjoy being a DBN analyst. It's a lot of fun. Like, I love talking about diplomacy and I love this game, and this is an opportunity to do that on a greater scale. So yeah, I really enjoy my role. And I think one of the biggest challenges is your time management, because I could sit there and talk about a phase for 15, 20 minutes, and that's not good. You need to keep the speed going. And you also, I think DBN is really, really good at widening the audience and hopefully bringing new players in. And you have to keep that in the back of your mind. So you have to try and give your insights and analysis in such a way that experienced players can understand what you're saying, but you're also not locking out any new people who maybe don't understand if you're just throwing jargon around or going a bit too technical. You have to have it in such a way that anyone can follow along. And as for like the rewarding side of it, I mean, just aside from people I like talking about diplomacy with me and people in the chat following on, that's all really, really cool. There's also, I've never been recognized as someone before. And I got to Dixie and there were a couple of people who just went, Michaelis. And I'm like, I don't know who you are. This is very, very new for me. So that was, it's always a little bit weird. I think it was Nicholas Bob Seville who just like said my name so he saw, and I'm just like, no idea who you are, but hi, nice to meet you. And that was really, really cool. And
it's the perils of being famous. And now you're both famous and infamous for winning the tournament as well. So all right, let's skip to the last subject I want to talk to you about, which is sort of the meta around the game today. You're sort of known as really enjoying a good IT alliance, but tell us where you think the meta of the game has gone, and as far as the Eastern powers go, as well as the Western powers, and do you see any changes for that in the near future?
So since I started playing virtual, I think meta is a lot faster to change than it has been in the past. And AIRs were very, very popular a couple of years ago. They've sort of gotten a bit more out of fashion now. Last year it was just AIs which were dominating. I think recently, perhaps my propaganda has helped, but ITs, I've started seeing a lot more of them in games I'm not on, and that's something I always love to see. And I think that's also something that's quite important to see, because France has been doing extremely well recently. And if France is doing extremely well in the West, you need an Italy that could go and slow them down and deal with them. And an IT alliance, once you've taken out Austria at the start, Italy should be going that way and dealing with France. And perhaps that's actually part of the reaction, because an AI, Italy sending all their fleets the other way, it's not very easy to turn back and attack France afterwards. And France has a lot more time to dominate that. So yeah, I've definitely seen Italy's doing better and IT's being a bit more common of late, and I hope to see that continue for sure. In the West, I think Germany had an awful year last year, but Germany has been doing better at the start of this year, which again could be a reaction to how well France has been doing. I hope to see that continue as well.
Yeah, hopefully people pay attention to the way countries are going and they adapt to that. But the other thing is they pay attention to what other people are doing in other games. Now that we have DBN, we can watch other people play more than we used to. We can learn things either to do or not to do. It actually improves the play, I would hope.
Yeah, I think that's, as I said, like meta's changing more quickly now. And I think that the DBN is definitely going to be part of that, because people will see something that succeeds on DBN and go, oh, that works well. I should give that a go. Not done that before. And so that is perhaps how things are sort of diffusing more rapidly across the community than they were in the past. But again, then someone on DBN or a game that's shown on DBN will see someone counter that and how to counter that. And people go, oh, look, I keep getting killed by this alliance. That alliance works against it. Let's do that. And so hopefully it just keeps it sort of dynamically changing rather than a static, this alliance is always happening and this alliance is never happening or always losing.
Yeah, it's always fun to adapt to prevailing meta. I'm actually playing in an email game right now in a British zine, and it is still a thing as it was 30 years ago for the Austrians to hold their fleet in Trieste. That's kind of a known thing that you do because you're so worried about the Italians, which is something to those of us in the virtual world like, what in tarnation are you doing? And as the Italian player in my game, I was a little shocked when I saw that. And then I realized, oh, yes, this is like it was in 1992. Particularly in the UK hobby, which always did have an AI beating each other up kind of meta.
Yeah, I think that was also one of the things at Dixie, and that Dixie had a lot of people who've played virtual, but also quite a lot of people who I know only really play at Dixie, and you could physically see that meta was different, and there were a few unusual openings that you almost never see online. That they go through in Spring 01, they'll be like, "What?" and they'll be like, "Oh, all right, okay, this is how I've got to react to that." And some of them is stuff I've seen in the past online that were used to be a lot more common. The Turkish opening with two armies was very common at Dixie, where they both go up to Bull and Khan, which is quite out of fashion in virtual. So you have to think back and go, okay, this is what used to happen from that. This is what's strong, this is what isn't. But yeah, there's definitely, it's always nice to play in different metas and ways that make you think more than you normally do.
Who wants to play the same game over and over again?
Exactly.
Not me. Any other final thoughts for our audience, because
I think to anyone who's not gone to a face-to-face event before, but has the opportunity, is maybe a little bit on the fence, I'd say give it a go. Like, such a great experience. I cannot say enough how much I enjoyed Whipping and Dixie, and meeting everyone for the first time and all the socializing aspect as well, that you definitely get a lot more of that than you do in virtual. So yeah, come along, give it a go. They're such fun, and it's such a wonderful community. Cannot stress that enough. Come along, give it a go. And to anyone who hasn't played virtual before, maybe you've got family commitments, maybe you've got job commitments, and you can't give up a whole weekend or 4 or 5 days to go to a convention. 6 to 8 hours is quite a lot of time on a weekend, but I think that's a lot easier for you to square. So come along, play VDL, play Tour of Britain. Give yourself a go. Just a one-off casual game. Who knows? You might really like it.
Hear, hear. McCallus, thanks for being on the show. Thanks to all of you watching at home. We hope you have enjoyed this broadcast of Deadline. If you have news, ideas for features, or feedback of any kind, please feel free to send an email to info@diplobn.com, or you can drop me a line directly using davidhood@dixiecon.com. To review all of our broadcast offerings, visit our website at diplobn.com. This is David Hood signing off. I wish you brightness and bliss, and of course, Belgium.